when you have this blind faith in the healthcare system as this sort of heroic fountain of youth, that's unrealistic because you cannot win against death when it's coming. Then you can lead yourself, no matter how much of a person how much of a doer and how much of a successful person you are. You can lead yourself into a place that I don't think you want to be.
Today, we are joined by Dr. Jessica Zitter. Jessica is a national advocate for transforming the way people die in America. She is Harvard and UCSF-trained to practice the unusual combination of both critical and palliative care medicine. She works as an attending physician at a public hospital in Oakland, California. Jessica is also the author of the book Extreme Measures: Finding a Better Path to the End of Life, and her work is featured in the Academy and Emmy-nominated short documentary Extremis, which is available on Netflix. In this episode, we talk with Jessica about how we avoid the conversation about death by hiding behind differences such as religion, culture, and race. She talks about why it is important to speak about death far in advance of being anywhere near it, about the conflict doctors have against the need and desire to keep people alive versus maintaining their quality of life up to the end. She also digs deeper into the extremely difficult decision-making processes that people have to go through near the end, especially when conversations about death didn't happen in advance. Please support the show by liking and sharing this episode on social media, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, please sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com. It would also be a massive help to us if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can do right now by simply clicking the subscribe button. Now, fascinating episode coming up with Dr. Jessica Zitter. You cannot win against death.
We were discussing this with Keith. We just watched Extremis an hour ago. I read your articles before, and I never had the chance to watch Extremis. So I said, look, we will interview Jessica, so let's watch that.
We're going to support you through this.
Pull the crash cart in.
She won't wake up from this in a meaningful way.
Mama? Knowing at some point you got to get to that reality, and now it's here.
And I started to watch it, and I was just like so impacted, and I ping Keith on the phone and say, Keith, just watch the movie right now. It's only 20 minutes, just do it. Watch this documentary. Really, it just grounded me. Something happened to me. It was like shifting totally. I was just like there before I was doing my executive things, and then suddenly I was just like, wow, this is real. Something is happening there. So I don't know, Keith, how you felt it as well.
Started watching it. It was like, okay, and then it just started getting into it, and I just realized there was like this big thing dropped on me. I can't explain it. Wow. It was just talking to Olivier beforehand. It was like, man, it brings it. I was like, this shit's real. Like it's there. It's going to happen. It's like, I think at the start of it, it says it's like everyone in this room's going to die, and just watching it in that environment and what you go through, and it just, so much of it for me that hit me was so much of what makes that uncomfortable is the fact that people are only thinking about this for the first time. So it's all that uncertainty and that not knowing makes it harder for everyone involved, the family, the actual person, the carers around them. Whereas I think I saw something else you said about it was on the Dr. Oz thing. There's a point you made about we should be having these discussions now. We should know, we should get clear on it. It should be written down. You don't want to be going through that. And that's the thing that hit me, is that the emotion that came out in that documentary. It's hard to watch that and not connect with it. I think if you're in any way non-psychopathic, I think it's so
that's saying it like it is.
And then when you look at it, well, why it's hard enough even if you've got all the decisions made, you know what's there, it's going to be hard, but throw all that in on top of it as well, and it increases everyone's pain. It's hard to just be there for the person, or hard for the person just to let go or fight, because there's all these conflicting views and conflicting emotions going on. And even like the bit, there was a bit there around the religious piece. So people probably, I'm taking a guess here, but probably the same religion, but both coming at it from a different view. So it's like they're both saying it's God's will. But on one side, well, turn off the machine, because if it's God's will, I'll breathe or I won't. And the other person saying, well, it's God's will, therefore we'll leave the machine on and hope for a miracle. So both coming from the same place, but two completely different views.
That's something I write about a lot in my book, which is that in so many ways, I mean, we sometimes can avoid the conversation about death and avoid really getting into it by hiding behind different kinds of differences, religious differences, racial differences, language differences, and say, okay, well, you know what? That person just says, do everything you can. So let's just do everything we can. Let's keep this person going on the end of life conveyor belt, which is something I talk a lot about, without any further discussion, because they've told us they want us to do everything. What I really believe is that we have a language, at least in America, and I'm really curious about Europe and about how you talk about these issues. There's a very American reality that if you fight, you can win. This is this sort of Wild West kind of mentality. I sort of see it as a kind of a distinctly American thing. And I feel like we just kind of regress into that tradition of, well, let's just keep fighting because that's the default. If we have any question or conflicts or emotion, the best thing to do is just kind of stay where it's safe, which is just to keep fighting, keep doing it. And that's what we do. I think that's very dangerous. It may be ethically the right thing, if there's any question or concern or conflict, to err on the side of keeping a body alive. Mm-hmm. That may be ethically the correct thing to do. In my experience, if you stay in a conversation with somebody who's saying, I believe in miracles, keep her alive, most of the time, if you really stay with that person and you support them and you support their vision of God and you support their vision of caring, of loving this person who's dying, eventually with information continuing to come through to them, even though it's hard to present that information, most people, in my experience, tend to finally say, no, this isn't what she would want. And so just because there's a language of religion or a language of race or a language of something that's going to keep us from having that conversation and continuing and staying with that conversation, we actually have an obligation to stay in that conversation, because a lot of the time in my experience, that's just language and stuff to keep us from talking about very difficult, painful topics that we actually need to be talking about, even in extremis, in those last moments. Mm-hmm. You have to stay with your patient, you have to stay with the family and keep the conversation going. A lot of times that's just the first response. It's the American, let's keep fighting. It's the religion, I believe in miracles. It's the racial inequities, I don't want to be seen as a racist. So, stop with all those feelings and those fears and actually stay in conversation, stay in relationship. And much of the time, with trust starting to get built, people kind of come back to a place of really thinking about what that person's true preferences and values are. That was a very long-winded way of just saying there's lots of things that we have to get past to get to the human. But it's complicated.
It made me laugh, actually. I think it's the opening of a documentary when you have a patient, I believe, in very bad shape, and you ask the patient, how are you? And then you just catch yourself and you say, okay, that's a very stupid question, but I just ask you because you can see that. But I think that there's something about this automatic response that we have, like this. We need to be positive. We need to say, and there's another moment in the movie where the person asks, "Oh, you look good. You look better." It's always keep fighting. Yeah. Okay, it's okay. It's better. It's better. Let's be so.
Yeah, it's gonna get better.
It's gonna get better. Yeah. Obviously, stay positive. And how can we change that, basically, or how can we accept the unacceptable, basically? That's the question, really.
It's very, very hard. It's hard as one of those doctors who has to be the person who is the bearer of bad news so much of the time. I was just doing a presentation yesterday about sort of what does it take to break bad news, and why is it so hard? Well, we know why it's so hard, because it's emotional. People get upset, people get angry. You're afraid that you might be wrong, right? That fear of uncertainty. There's so many reasons why a doctor might not want to break bad news. And yet all of us who are interested in this topic know that we still need to do it. We still need to do it, even if we're not 100% certain about the outcome, even if we're afraid that we're going to upset somebody. We still need to, as you know, bring forward information that people sometimes don't want to hear, but it needs to come into the conversation eventually. It's still hard for me a lot of the time. And in the movie, there's moments where there's one point where I say to Gordon, the brother of Donna, who we eventually end up taking the tube out, I say, this is what we see in end stage myotonic dystrophy. And I use that clip as a teaching point, because, you know, you don't necessarily look at that and say, oh my God, she was having a hard time getting those words out. But you know what? I was having a hard time getting those words out. Here's this guy whose sister, beloved sister, is, you know, at the end of her progressive neuromuscular dysfunction. She is never going to come off the breathing machine, but he doesn't know that, or he's praying that that's not true. And he's been told that, well, putting in a trach, you know, taking the tube out of her mouth and putting in a trach is going to make her more comfortable. It's true. It's going to make it easier to clean her mouth. It's true. It's going to possibly allow her maybe to one day eat a little bit of food by mouth. Not really, but that's possible. And that all sounds like good stuff. And so he's seeing this intervention that we're about to do, this trach, as something positive, right? But it's not. It's not positive because, based on what we know about this woman, she never wanted to live in a ventilator facility. She saw her sister, this was a genetic disease in her family. She saw her father, her older sister, and a cousin all die on ventilators. And she told her brother, do not let that happen to me. The fact is that, trach or not, that was what we were heading towards. If she got surgically attached to this ventilator, that was the beginning of the end-of-life conveyor belt, which is a term that I like to use because I think it's a perfect example of what this is. It's very hard to, once you've done that surgery, to turn away and say, oh, let's just disconnect it. You've done a surgery on somebody to keep them attached to a machine. I'm going in to break this bad news to him, and I'm having trouble getting the words out. It's end stage myotonic dystrophy. It is not easy to say those kinds of things. And so what do we have that can help us do it? We know cognitively that we need to do it. We have to practice those words over and over again. You know, Pat, that nurse who I allude to in the movie, who says, they're torturing a patient. You know, she was my mentor. That was many years ago. She's a palliative care nurse, before palliative care was even an official subspecialty. She used to make me practice the words death and dying. She'd say the word, say it. You have to get some muscle memory into it. It's very hard, even as a person who's been practicing palliative care for, 10 years now, to actually get those words out when you look at this family member who is so holding on everything you say to show him that it's going to get better. You use muscle memory, practice skills, drills. There's other kinds of tools that can be helpful, like videos that we can show people on an iPad. Press play. This is what it looks like to be on a ventilator. So you don't have to actually even say the words. You just press play and it shows somebody. Those are the kinds of things that we need to use as support to getting that very difficult news out to people. It's hard to say it.
What is the purpose here? Is it to live longer, like to maintain a body longer, or is it only to live? And what does it mean to live? Maybe it's a judgment here, but for doctors, the purpose is make sure that nobody will die. So make anybody live the longest, basically. But what does it mean, really? Is it to be attached to a machine, or is it to live comfortably? So I think it's a very hard decision at the end of the day.
It is, and that's why, in order to make that decision, people need to have an understanding of what those two options mean. People need to understand, to visualize what living on a ventilator means. And that is very hard and painful information to transmit to someone who's in extremis, who's scared, who's seeing their loved one dying, talking about the decubitus ulcers, talking about living a life in a ventilator facility, their arms tied down to the bed, the loneliness, those kinds of things that most of us can't even imagine. And the person you're telling this information to is actually about to go there. That's extremely scary. That information has to be transmitted to them, but we should be talking about this stuff way upstream before it's that threatening and scary and emotional, so that we're not having those kinds of terrible conversations about what this is going to look like when they're on the precipice of going there.
No one in that situation is thinking straight fully, are they? I mean, it's
No. Including the doctor. Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, it's affecting everyone in the room. I mean, it's a big thing. I mean, that question came up a few times during the documentary. Is the person making the decision, are they in a good state of mind to be making this decision? So again, it's pouring all of this stuff into a funnel where it all comes out at the end in the worst possible time for everyone.
I hope you guys, this is not just a shameless plug for reading my book, but I hope you'll read the book, because the book also actually, the cases that are in Extremis in the movie are in the book as well. Mm-hmm. And it's a much longer form, much more nuanced, much more reflective environment to discuss all of these factors. You know, the movie is very powerful and emotional, and you kind of come away from it with an emotion and a motivation. But the book delves into all of these factors that are impeding the communication, that are weighing in on the doctor as she does or doesn't give the information, on the patient and the loved one as he or she does or doesn't make this decision or that decision. And I think, again, using story, it's really a way to put all of us into the positions of all of these different characters in the play and have a better understanding of what might be going on for all of us as we dance around these very, very difficult decisions and issues.
Do you have actually a story to share, that can maybe illustrate what you're mentioning?
Oh my gosh, I've got so many. It's all about stories. I mean, I'm trying to think. I can give you a personal story. It's called Uncle Barry in the book, and it's about my husband, who's no longer standing there. It's about his uncle, who was an amazing man. Their whole family sort of had this vision of the doctor as just this, hero person. And in fact, it's interesting because we're Jewish, and it's a big part of our religion. It's all over the Torah and the Talmud, sort of this idea of the sanctity of saving life, of doing God's work. So many Jewish families, including my own and certainly my husband's as well, there's this sort of this feeling of, wow, this doctor is doing this incredible, important work. And so we sort of revere our doctors. I think it's a big part of why I went into medicine and why so many of the people in my family became doctors so quickly. They came over from Europe as very uneducated, and within a very short time, many, many people were trying to be doctors. And same thing in my husband's family. And so Barry, this my husband's uncle, who was the son of this patriarch of the family, went to Harvard, very smart man. He himself wasn't going to become a doctor, but he went to law school, very, very smart. He was a hero in the American Army during World War II. He was one of the, they're called forward observers. They'd fly him in and they'd drop him down behind enemy lines, and he'd go and send the coordinates of where the Nazis were, and then they would send he did brave stuff. He was the second American into Dachau to liberate the camp. He was just this bigger than life, Harvard educated lawyer, war hero, etc., who really believed in American medicine. He believed in the sanctity. He believed that there was always some hope in American medicine to achieve that heroic end. And so as Barry got older and older and more frail, we knew, and his son Wes would say to me, Jess, I'm worried. My dad won't talk to me. He won't talk about end of life planning. He just believes in the doctor. He wants the doctor to do everything. Every time I try to talk to him, at this point he's 85. Every time I try to talk to him about, what would he want? What would he do? How does he want to live? He, all the stuff that I've been talking about, he just won't, just trust my doctor. And so what ended up happening was exactly what you'd expect. Barry started to deteriorate. He got sicker and sicker. Next thing, he's on a ventilator. Then, he's on the ventilator. Then he has a massive cardiac arrest, and so his brain isn't working anymore. Then on top of it, his heart, he has a massive heart attack. And so then the doctors are saying, well, he wanted everything done. So they say, well, maybe we need to go in and do a cardiac catheterization and some kind of, stenting. And all of this was going on. And here's this war hero who is now no longer has his brain, but whose words are following him to the grave of do everything the healthcare system will save me. At a certain point, it was up to his son to have to make a decision with the support of all of us in the family to stop it, even though his words were ringing in our ears. It was heartbreaking. And we ended up, he ended up getting extubated and dying the day after Wes's birthday, because Wes couldn't do it on his birthday. But Wes was left with this legacy of having to, in a way, go against his father's words. However honest they weren't informed. None of us believe. We don't think he could have imagined it, because it so doesn't go with his whole life and the way he lived. So that was a long-winded way to show you, and this is such a common story, that when you have this blind faith in the healthcare system as this sort of heroic fountain of youth, that's unrealistic, because you cannot win against death when it's coming. Then you can lead yourself, no matter how much of a person how much of a doer and how much of a successful person you can lead yourself into a place that I don't think you want to be.
Do you think that things are changing though? Or are we still like, there's this illusion that we can beat everything basically? If we keep going, everything will turn out okay. Or is there like something like, do you see any trend emerging, like a new way?
But in America, I'm seeing in our medical education system more of a at least cognitive shift in understanding that we've got to start teaching people how to manage death and dying the way we value manage living. We have to. That's a part of the circle of life. It's obvious, and we just can't not train our healthcare professionals to take this seriously and to really learn how to do it with grace. Now the next phase is, okay, we've got that sort of general cognitive shift. What are we going to do? How are we going to teach our nurses? How are we going to teach our doctors? How are we going to teach our nurses and doctors to work together around the same patient, to be collaborative? We've got a very hierarchical system. I'm sure in the same in the UK, and it's very hierarchical. Actually, you're not in the UK. You're in Ireland. Ireland is not considered the UK. Sorry about my ignorance. Right?
The people in Ireland will thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
We've got a lot of work to do for the rubber to really hit the road. But I think there's a rising awakening in the healthcare world that this is important. The other piece is that there's a lay interest. There's rising lay interest. People are there's lots and lots of articles in the New York Times all the time coming out about death and dying and how do people want to live. It's amazing to see this tsunami of interest in the lay community. I still think we need to work on it being more than just these sort of currently the readers of New York Times, the people who tend to read the New York Times, which tends to be a highly educated, generally white community. We've got to get that message out to everybody. Everybody deserves this message about how to empower themselves to live the way they want to all the way to the end. But at least some people are starting to pay attention to it, and we've got to get the message out to everybody else.
You are in direct relation with death, basically, and dying. So did you see yourself changing, or what did you learn along the way? I'm just very curious about what happened to you.
It's been very, very interesting. I have changed a lot. I think about now part of it is also coincident with my getting older. So there may be some piece of it that as I get older, people start to think about their own mortality more. But I think a lot of it has to do with my work. I feel very clear about the fact that I'm going to die. And I never really thought about it much before. I'm clear about the fact that my children could die. My children could die before me. I see this all the time. Many of my patients have their children die before they do. I am much more aware of death. I am much more aware of how I want to live. I'm absolutely would never want to live on a machine the way so many of my patients do. Our family has had many, many more conversations. My kids have heard, I did something called Death Education. I don't know if you guys saw that article it's called First Sex Ed, Then Death Ed. And it's about teaching kids sex ed. Like I taught my kids sex ed in their schools as the parent doctor. I went in and taught them death ed also. What about death? Why shouldn't a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old learn about how death works and about how the hospital works? We got to be having these conversations around the kitchen table. We've got to be having them in our families so that our families really have the gift of knowing, what Wes never knew about Barry, which is, how do you want to live?
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.